Bring your friends and your folks along down to the river and sing this song.
RiverFest, it's the best.
Bonjour, welcome to the Fort's Folle Avoine Historic Park, operated by the Burnett County Historical Society of Burnett County, Wisconsin. We are here at a fur post site, a historically significant fur post site that was here 215 years ago. The Northwest Fur Company came into northern Wisconsin, and for 3 consecutive winters they operated a fur post right down there. You see that log palisade, that wall? In there are 3 log cabins. That's the fur post. It's called a fort because of the palisade wall to keep wild animals out. The fur companies came in and they set up that post and spent all winter long trading with the local natives 200 years ago. And the local natives 200 years ago were the Ojibwe, and they are still here. The local band of St. Croix Ojibwe are still here, and they thrive here. They thrived here 200 years ago, pursuing their historic hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Things have changed in 200 years, but 200 years ago, and for the years previous to that, they had pursued their seasonally nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle here in the Northwoods of Wisconsin. Now, they are also known as, by the way, Ojibwe, Chippewa, and Anishinaabe. The other natives knew them as Ojibwe. The government made up the word Chippewa. That ended up on all the paperwork. And they call themselves Anishinaabe. Anishinaabe in Ojibwe means the people. We're the people. Now, my name is Wazigisik Mejiki. That's my native name. My wife knows me as Jackson. I'm the native interpreter here at the Folle Avoine Historic Park. I give tours to the public, and I show them the seasonally nomadic lifestyle that the Ojibwe lived in their 4 seasonal camps. I take the participants in our program through a year in the life of an Ojibwe family, living right here in the woods, and in the winter trading at that fur post. Now, the fur post was here and operated in the winter. The fur business was a winter business. The fur companies wanted winter furs when animals grow their thick, rich coats. That's what sold on the markets of Europe. And in the winter, the native people, the Ojibwe, were in the woods harvesting fur-bearing animals, hunting and trapping them, and processing the hides for trade at a local fur post. This is what they did every winter. Now, in the spring, they would transition to their spring harvest. In the fur post employees, the voyageurs, they would pack up their furs, and having traded off all the trade goods all winter long to the natives in exchange for the furs, they were out of here. The day the ice went out on the Little Yellow River they paddled in on last fall, they were out of here. They take those furs up to Lake Superior, they sell them and get paid. The Ojibwe simply transitioned to their spring harvest. They moved 4 times a year, seasonally nomadic. In the spring, they went to Sugar Bush, a stand of maple trees that was the family's, and they harvested maple sugar. After the harvest of maple sugar in the spring, all the families from all the sugar bushes came together for a summer camp, a huge camp called Village, by a body of water, productive for fish camp and other summer activities. Now, in the fall, wild rice, their sacred food, Monoman, ripens automatically every fall, and they go harvest that. And then after the rice harvest, they are back in the woods after the fall rice harvest to pursue another season of hunting and trapping. The voyageurs are back somewhere in the area, have built another fur post, and they do it again, spend a winter hunting and trapping. Now, the Ojibwe, though they were here 200 years ago, they came here from somewhere else in the 1600s. The Ojibwe migrated into the Lake Superior area from the northeast coast of what's now Canada up in the Newfoundland area. They were there back in the 1400s and 1300s, and they were told they needed to move. They needed to migrate as a people, moving west through the Great Lakes till they came to the land where the food grows on the water. Their visionary elders were having prophecies, and this was their story. They had set out in the 13 and 1400s, migrating west through the Great Lakes in search of the land where the food grows on the water. Now, they got to Lake Superior in the early 1600s, found the monoman, the wild rice. We live here in the land where the food grows on the water, and they figured this was it. They had arrived, and they made themselves at home. Now, they began to live their hunter-gatherer lifestyle here, and this is a bountiful land to be a hunter-gatherer culture. The lakes and streams were filled with fish. The woods was filled with fur-bearing animals that were harvested in the winter and traded with the fur traders. And in the summer, by the way, the woods was also filled with abundant berries, wild berries, and edible greens, and all the nuts. And then every fall, the wild rice ripens automatically. It's a naturally occurring wild aquatic grass. It was here before anybody was here, and it'll be here long after we're gone, probably. And they would harvest then the wild rice in the fall. Now, let's back up to a little bit and talk about some details of these 4 harvest seasons. So what we'll do is we'll go through the year, the 4 seasonal harvest camps, and we'll talk about how the Ojibwe lived 200 years ago. Now, in the winter, they're in small family hunting camps, spread out in the woods, hunting fur-bearing animals and trading at a local fur post. Now, in the small, I'm talking mom, dad, 2 or 3 kids and an elder, usually grandma or an auntie. As the men didn't live as long as the men were the warriors and the hunters. The women who ran things, by the way, this is a matriarchal culture. And in the matriarchal culture, the women are pretty much in charge. They own the property, they build and maintain the wigwams, and they run the camps in the villages, which frees the men to be the warriors and the hunters they need to be. So it worked out just fine. Now, in that small family hunting camp, the wigwam, you see one behind me, built by a local band of St. Croix, Ojibwe, and their youth director and some youth came over and built this for us. It's a gorgeous wigwam, but the wigwams in the winter were bedrooms. They were sleeping quarters. They were cozy, warm sleeping quarters, but they were dark and cramped, and you couldn't cook in there and you couldn't work in there. What the Ojibwe did in their winter hunting camp was have a companion structure, a lean-to. Let's go over there and take a look. So this is the lean-to in the winter hunting camp, the companion structure to the bedroom wigwam. Now this offers bright light and fresh air for a working environment. The lean-to is an efficient structure faced down against the prevailing northwest wind. If you're wondering how in the world you can work in the winter here, it was a shelter, and the cooking fire going on all day long cooking the meals was also the heating fire. Air currents curl under, naturally move heat back into the interior, and that log wall is just to reflect heat back. So the women could sit in here, properly dressed, of course, in the winter and do the work of the winter hunting camp, cooking the meals and doing everything they always do in every camp of the season. And they also are processing the furs to be traded over at the fur post. Remember, winter is fur trade season. And all the animals have to be processed. They have to be killed, skinned, fleshed out clean, stretched on a wooden frame and dried. Then the furs can be traded over at the fur post. So all that is going on while they're cooking the stew-style meals in the kettle over the fire. Now, the first thing in the kettle on the fire for the stew-style meal in the morning is the monoman, the wild rice. That is their sacred food, the basis of every meal. To that we'd add fresh meat. We'd add dried vegetables from last summer's garden, and then we would season it with maple sugar. That was the seasoning of the traditional Ojibwe family. There's no salt in the Northland or other spices. They use the medicinal plants for medicines, not seasoning in their stew. So the stew is cooking away, and they're working. The boys are out with their dads and older male relatives hunting and trapping fur-bearing animals. The girls are here working with their moms and their grandmas and their aunties, learning the skills of the family in the camp. Now, in the traditional Ojibwe culture, that stew-style meal here is being cooked in a metal kettle, a brass kettle, traded for at a fur post. But before they could trade for that brass kettle, guess what they cooked their meals in? The makuk, the birch bark basket. You might be thinking, wait, we can't cook in a birch bark basket over fire? Well, you can if you're fussy and careful, and that's what they did. before they could acquire the kettle, because what these fur traders do is bring in these what we call the goods every fall, paddle in blankets and kettles and metal tools and weapons and flintlock muskets, state-of-the-art firearm in the world, and the natives trade the furs for those. All these trade goods are upgrades to the technologies of living, very important for the Ojibwe, because the Ojibwe pursue a survival lifestyle. And every upgrade that can improve their chance of survival is important. The metal kettle cooking their stew is a huge upgrade to the technology of the cooking fire. You can cook in this two ways. You can set it here on the ground, and you can spend all day long changing out hot rocks and heating the water that way. It'll cook your food. It just takes all day and constant labor. Or you can suspend it with the same stew ingredients over the fire and just fuss over that little fire all day. That'll cook your food too, but it takes all day and you have to fuss over it. But the kettle, talk about an upgrade to the technology of the cooking fire. You put your ingredients in the morning, and then every hour or two you check it, looking good, go back doing something else you have to do to survive. So this is a huge upgrade to our lifestyle technology. And then during the day, the hunters and whatnot, anybody that wanted could dip in and have something to eat. Now here they are all winter long, cooking and living and trapping and trading. And we have long winters, about 6 months, but winter does eventually come to an end, and when it does in the spring, the voyageurs pack up and leave. They won't be back till next fall. The Ojibwe transition to sugar bush. They pack up all their stuff, they roll up the birch bark off the top of their winter wigwams, and leave the frames in place, load all their stuff onto their sleds and toboggans, and get ready to leave. And put on their snowshoes, a native invention. This is late March, early April. There's still a foot or two of snow on the ground, and then they gather up their only domesticated animal the Ojibwe had 200 years ago, and that's the dog. Half wild dogs don't have to take care of these dogs. The Ojibwe just let the dogs hang around camp. The dogs fed themselves, took care of themselves. They were a built-in guard system, and when you need them to do a little work, you'll come up to your sleds and toboggans, they pull them, and off you go to Sugar Bush. This way. Follow me. Well, welcome to Sugar Bush. Now, when the family gets to Sugar Bush, they're joined by all the rest of the family. Remember, those winter camps were small family camps. At Sugar Bush, they're joined by all the brothers and sisters and aunties and uncles and cousins and nieces and nephews from the family. All come to the Sugar Bush to pitch in and do the work, because the Sugar Bush is a permanent seasonal camp. They are back here every spring to harvest their maple sugar. It's that stand of maple trees that is the family's. Now, they get here and they set up camp because it's permanent. There are structures in place from years before. There's kettles to boil down sap. Now, we do the same day to get our maple syrup from a maple tree. We collect the sap and we cook it down to make syrup. The Ojibwe didn't want syrup. They didn't have pancakes. They wanted sugar. You make it the same way. You just keep cooking the sap down after you tap the trees and collect the sap until it gets really, really thick, and like oatmeal. And when it gets really, really thick like oatmeal, then you offload it into hollowed out wooden logs like this one here, and you stir it. And as it begins to stiffen and harden, before it hardens like a brick, you load it into a birch bark macaque for storage, like this, and you let it harden like a brick. And I have Zinzi Bakwad right here, maple sugar, a maple sugar rock right here. Now this is the seasoning in their foods, and it is also a food in and of itself. I can nibble on it during the day for energy. It's a very high energy food. So that's the story of the Ojibwe Sugar Bush. Now, we hope we have been lucky and we've had an extended run of the maple sap, because we depend on this harvest, this spring harvest, all year long for our maple sugar. So if we're lucky, we have an extended run of, a month to 6 weeks, and we make a couple 1,000 pounds of maple sugar. That's right. And then we will, after the sugar harvest, we will transition to our summer village. So once this sugar harvest is complete, we will go down to the river, get our birch bark canoes where we sunk them with rocks last fall, and we will from all the sugar bushes, all over that area, we will all come together at an agreed upon location for Summer Village. All the families from all the sugar bushes will come together. Let's go to Summer Village. Now, when all the families from all the sugar bushes come together at the agreed location for Summer Village, this is like a reunion of the band. All the families, this is the only time of year that all the families can come together in the summer at Village, because they're not competing for firewood, they're just cooking, and they're not competing for furs to be traded at a fur post. You can hunt for meat in the summer, but nobody wants summer fur. So the fur traders are gone, and that's not an issue. So we can create a village. And 200 years ago, back over in through the woods on Yellow Lake, which is close to here, there was a village of about 800 Ojibwe for the summer. We have that on record. We know that to be true during the time the fur post was here. Now, at Summer Village, numbers of things are pursued in the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. The big one is fish harvest. Fish are harvested as a crop. Massive quantities are netted and trapped, as well as the gathering of nuts and berries and gardening. The Three Sisters Garden, corn, beans, and squash, is pursued in the summer. And also the gathering of the medicinal plants. The medicine culture in the Ojibwe people is very effective, and the wisdom there is very deep. We are still learning from the Ojibwe medicine wisdom. And those plants are being gathered in the summer and processed into medicines. All these things are occurring in the summer, though the warriors are off in the summer pursuing their warring activities, and the men that aren't warriors are here hunting and helping with the summer activities. There is also courtship and marriage that takes place in the summer. In addition to being a matriarchal culture, this is a clan culture. And in the summer, the one season of year, all the clans come together. That is the opportunity for courtship and marriage, because if I'm a young Bear Clan man, say, and I come of age, I cannot pick from the young Bear Clan girls. I need to find another clan, Crane Clan, Martin Clan, Wolf Clan, any other clan. That's how they kept the gene pool straightened out. It's forbidden to marry within your own clan. So the summer will be my opportunity, and the traditional courtship traditions was a man would, in the winter, in his cabin or his wigwam, he would make himself a cedar flute and he would practice. And if that girl that he was admiring shows up to Summer Village, he would play his flute. And if she responded and came out of her wigwam, then he would present gifts to her family. That's the sign he's hoping for. And if they think he's okay and they're excited too, then we can have a marriage ceremony. And as a matriarchal culture and a clan culture, their lineage is matriarchal, and their kids will be Crane Clan if that girl is a Crane Clan. And that's how that works. Now, in addition to the other summer activities, there is a lot of gathering of wild berries and nuts, and I can't describe the abundance of the wild berries and nuts 200 years ago. It's phenomenal. And all that is occurring. And they're being dried and they're being stored for future, and they're being eaten fresh, of course, as are the fish that are. This is a fish trap. Fish were harvested in massive quantities, netted. We have a fish net, traditional, behind us, and the fish trap was built right in the stream. And as high as the water is deep, so we're in knee-high water here, say, and the fish trap was meant to catch fish. Stream built from willows growing right along the bank, it was very effective. And the fish were harvested from that. Three things were done with the fish. They were eaten fresh, they were smoked and eaten within a month or so, or they were dried on racks in the sun, pounded in a powder on a rock, bones and all, and fish powder was made, and that was stored for the future. The Ojibwe had a process of producing stored foods. They would dry everything. Everything was dehydrated. And they would store their dried foods in makuks, birch bark baskets, seal them up and put them in little cellars in the ground called food caches. And then they could dig them up when they needed them. If they hadn't had a process for storing surplus foods and preserving them, they would have never made it in this climate. But they did have a process, and it worked very well. They thrived here. And that was it, storing dried foods in sealed makuks and food caches. So here we are in the summer, making our fish powder, collecting our berries and all the other foods. Nobody starves in the winter, or nobody starves in the summer, excuse me, I misspoke. Nobody starves in the summer in Wisconsin in the woods. You just take a walk, you've got lunch. And that's the story there. Now, at the end of summer, someone from the family will come into camp and announce, our rice is ripe. Now, this is a big deal. It's a time-sensitive harvest. This happens every fall, about the same time, mid to late August, early September, about the time the kids usually go back to school. When it's announced that the rice is ripe, they've got to go. All the families break up and go to their ricing lakes. Village breaks up, we'll see you again next summer, and off they go to their ricing lakes. Let's go to our ricing lake. Now, when we get to our ricing lake, by the way, every family has a ricing lake that it goes to. There are two permanent seasonal camps, that Sugar Bush in the spring and the ricing lake in the fall. Now, when we get to our ricing lake, most everybody sets up camp on shore, and two per canoe will paddle down to the rice beds. Now, wild rice will grow, the monoman. Wild rice will grow in riverbanks, but most of it is in shallow bays and lakes. About 1.5 feet of water, grows about this high off the water. When they get there, two per canoe will paddle down the rice beds to harvest, and everybody else will process it on shore. The two per canoe will harvest the rice by the person in the back of the canoe gently pulling the canoe forward typically, and the person in front of the canoe will harvest the rice with rice knockers, just like this. Advancing into the rice beds, they'll gently bend a group of stalks over, lightly brush and tap them a couple of times, let them stand back up. Brush, tap. As they do that, the ripe rice falls right in the boat. They let it stand back up, knowing every 3 or 4 days more rice will ripen on the same stalk, so it makes several passes before they get it all. Now, when they get the rice in the boat to the degree of about a bushel or two, they'll paddle ashore, offload it to the team on shore, and go back out again, do it all day long. Now, when it comes off the lake, it looks like this. This is raw rice. The wild rice grains are in here, but each is surrounded in a big husk. And it's damp. You got to get it drying in the sun. Spread it out on sheets and blankets. Get it drying in the sun. If it doesn't dry within 3 or 4 days, it'll mold and be ruined. And it's got to be clean. Now remember, everybody works in all these harvest camps, all these seasonal harvest camps, and it's got to be clean because it's full of bugs and spiders and little brown rice worms that bite you. And in rice camp, the kids clean the rice. All the kids with the little nimble fingers and the good eyesight, they get down and they pick out all the bugs and spiders while it's drying. Now, once it's dried, and they play games, of course, and have fun. Once it's dried, half dried, and all the bugs and spiders are picked out, it's cleaned, it's then taken to the parching station. In the traditional style, that cleaned half-dried rice was put in a dry kettle over a low fire and gently stirred. Now, parching is lightly toasting completely finishes the drying. Once it's parched, it can be danced. That parched rice is put in a station like this. Now, this is a setup with a shallow pit, maybe lined with a wooden tub or a clean cloth or hide, and then the kids come back to work. They've got special clean moccasins. They dance the rice, or jig the rice, sometimes called. They moosh the rice around with their feet, and the way they do that loosens all the husks. Now, once it's been danced, it can be winnowed. The danced rice is given to people with large, flat, shallow bark trays. It's tossed in the wind and blows the husks away, or if there isn't a wind, we fan it with a blanket, and once it's thoroughly winnowed and all the husks are separated out and the rice collects in the tray, it's heavy, it doesn't blow away, we have our monoman, our sacred food. And the Ojibwe believe the Creator gifted them the monoman so that they may thrive, that they may live, and this is a wonderful, nutritious food. Now, this is ready now to cook and eat. Cooks up in about 20 minutes, half an hour, has that rich, nutty flavor we all love. And you can live for a very long time on just wild rice alone if you need to, and sometimes we did, but that's okay. This is what we'd call today a superfood. It's about 10% protein because it's not rice. It's a whole grain, and it is a very important food. And if we're lucky, we have a bountiful rice harvest, and everybody gets their share, everybody worked, and we can divide it up and head back into the woods for another winter hunting season. The rice harvest is over, and it's time to go back to our winter hunting and trapping program. So the family breaks up at sea in the spring at Sugar Bush, and off we go back into the woods. Thank you, Miigwech.
Hello, I'm Kevin Hoyt, Director here at Folle Avoine, and this is my friend Mark Soulier from the St. Croix band of Ojibwe. We're here to talk about our winter wigwam project, about some of the details of harvesting and construction. Mark, would you like to explain what the framework is made out of?
Framework is made of ironwood. We use ironwood because it lasts long. It's durable. You can take off your birch bark and travel with your birch bark. This will be here. If you want to come back in the years, next season, you come back here and this will be here waiting for you to recover it up and use it over again.
And then to tie that together, you'd use wigwam?
Wigwam. Wigwam is the inside of the bass tree. You pull it off in long strings. You put it and soak it in the hot boiling water. And you pull it out and you can use it to really tough stuff. So you sew the birch bark together. You do the outside as you would on a tree. The color and the inside would be the inside of the wigwam. They all sew together pretty nicely. Sometimes it wants to curl up on you.
That would explain why you have the small dowels of wood in here to
Stop
keep
it
it from
curling.
bending.
Yep.
Okay. And then the reed matting here, I understand this is not the traditional style of the reed matting.
No, it was hard to find the reed matting this year, so we went to some other
A modern equivalent.
some other resources we could find. So it works out good. It's simulates the summertime where the kids in there and everything's nice and cool in there, and you live in there. The bed's in there, you sleep in there, and
It'll allow for airflow and.
Yep.
And in the wintertime, when you put the heavier bark over top of that, this would act as an insulation layer.
Perfect. Yep.
It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm going.
So how many people would live in on a wigwam like this?
You could put probably a real big family. I mean, they're probably mom, dad, auntie, grandma, uncle, whoever wanted to, part of your construction of your family. I mean, sometimes grandma lived with you forever. Then uncles would come visit. They'd come visit and stay for a while with their hunting party, and uncle would stay inside the wigwam. The other people in this hunting party would stay out. But it was used for the big part of the family.
And you'd said the birch bark would be taken off and carried the family as they went to different camps?
Yep, if you went to summer camp or blueberry camp or even winter camp, like say
Maple syrup?
maple syruping, yeah. Yep, or ricing camp, you had to go over there rice and by the lake and get the rice out. But you could use it for everything. I mean, it was transport. You could pick it up and move it pretty easy.
Very good. Okay, this is an example of the reed matting that we had to replace. You would harvest the cattail reeds with the canoe, cutting them off at the water line, piling them in the canoe. Then you bring them back and run them through a tub of almost boiling water to blanch them. Then you would have a string between two trees, a cordage, and you'd fold the top of them over the string and then sew back and forth through that in several places, tying it every so often to make a solid mat. Now, the thing about cattails is they've got little air sacs inside of the plant, and that acts as an insulation. So, Mark, what can you tell me about the benches in here?
These benches are probably made for the family to sleep on. The young kids would be closest to the back of it. To keep the bears or whoever might decide to come visit. They'd be in back with mom and dad, and uncle, grandpa would be sleeping out closer to the front end. They can maintain the fire too during the evening. They'd come out, get some more rocks or some more sticks or whatever, logs, bring them in, keep the fire going. Nice small leather, coals. Not a big flame, just coals.
Now, I suppose underneath you could use that for storage space?
That'd be a perfect place to put storage up. We had the furs down there, maybe the bows and arrows underneath there, so I got them accessible right away if they needed them. And all sorts of pots and pans when they got them from the fur traders. They got some stuff like that underneath there. Had to keep the stuff available when they needed it.
Now, they wouldn't store food in the lodges like
No.
this, would they?
Definitely not. Food wouldn't be in there because that would be just asking the bears to come, asking
Right.
the coyotes or wolves to come in. So the food would be stored outside, and I think they called them
Cache?
cache. Yeah.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Now, speaking of foods, now what were some of the foods that would have been found? I mean, I see we've got acorns here.
Yep.
I know you can make flour out of the acorns, and you can just eat them roasted.
Right.
That's primarily the white oak acorns, I believe. What else was around here in this area?
Well, I believe there was, the wild animals, the rabbits, the squirrels, and whatever was available for them to eat. I don't know.
Monoman, of course,
Yeah,
wild rice.
Rice, yeah, that was the staple.
Yeah.
Rice, they had rice almost every day probably because it would be staged for the whole year. They'd make enough for the family.
And maple sugar, I suppose, would be a big one.
Again, yes.
High energy food.
Right, maple sugar, maple candy. They make sugar candy out of it.
And I suppose fruits and berries in season.
In season, yeah, they would.
And did they ever dry things like
They did.
that?
Dry the berries and the fruits and stuff like that.
What about dried meats? And did they do a lot of meat drying and smoking?
They did some smoking. They did smoke the fish. They smoked the venison. So yeah, they smoked a lot of meats for fish.
Sounds like they had a pretty good diet.
Yes, you wouldn't go hungry, but you had to work for it. It was a lot of work. Everybody had their own job. They didn't nobody got a day off. There's no day off when you're working. 200 years ago.
Yeah, I think that was pretty much for everybody at that time period. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, you too again. Thank you.
So, in the wintertime, how would you heat a wigwam like this?
We would get our grandfathers, our big rocks. We put them inside there, and then we bring the fire into it. And also, the grandfathers would be a nice forming thing that could move them around, like big beds areas and stuff like that. So they called them grandfathers, the big rocks.
So basically, radiant heating.
Basically, that's what it was. Yeah, back.
Very interesting. Now, I understand that with the fort, we had a grant project through the Humanities Council. Now, that was basically to foster good relations with the tribe and us, and even though the grant has run out, we're still working towards that relationship.
Correct, yes. I mean, we worked at the fort quite a bit this summer. We'll hopefully get to work some more with them.
We'd more than likely would love to have you.
The outside of this would be covered with snow in the wintertime, so it acted as a barrier to keep the warmness in and coldness out, and the insulation for the wigwam itself would be covered with snow.
Now, the round top, that would help keep the snow from building up too heavily on top, wouldn't it?
Correct, yeah.
So that it wouldn't collapse?
Yep, in dome shape. It's really sturdy. If you're living in it, you've got access to keep it clean as much as possible.
Right.
So yeah, it's multi-purpose. It don't keep the rain out, snow out, and it got a few mosquitoes once in a while.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Nice to see you again, Kevin.
Thank you for coming.
Now bring your friends and your folks along down